welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be drawing a cow. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Alright, so here is the cow. Gonna have it white with some brown. Cows, like horses, they'll have almost a center point in between their eyes where the hair kind of converges on or distributes from. It's interesting. It doesn't, you don't sort of place the hair in the same way you do others. You have this interesting sort of middle point. So I'm going to start with the white first. We're actually going to start from this point, but just like everything else, it's one stroke and then one in between. It's just coming from a different angle than we usually do. And it'll bring in, right, as we come closer, we'll want that to be fully filled in, but it's interesting when animals have that. Usually I see it on horses. Cows, it's not unusual to see as well, but outside of those animals, you don't usually see it. You probably can. I'm sure it's in other animals as well, this trait. So these lines here are where the brown would kick in. So it's okay to have some variation in the lines. That'll make it look more real as the fur is going up or down or various ways. And then just kind of filling it in. Relatively straightforward outside of that one kind of detail. As we come up, we'll make the hair longer. So typically animals, by their faces, the hair is the shortest it'll be, especially by the noses 9 times out of 10. I have, on very rare occasions, I think usually with dog breeds, seen that that's not the case. But 9 times out of 10, most animals, even long-haired animals, the hair by the nose, and subsequently in the face in general, but by the nose is the shortest. And then on the face itself, they typically have pretty short hair, and then it just gets longer as it goes out from there. Right, so we're still following that angle. This is the angle we came down from, so we won't really have to turn from the nose or anything, because we're just going to keep that angle all the way to the edge of the face. And push that all the way down. You can loop it a little bit as you come down, totally up to you. This is a sketching step still, right? So this isn't the final, kind of a final layer or anything. This is just to help make sure that there's no line conflicts with the fur, because that can be a tricky thing when you're having to deal with that. And then I don't have to worry about it when I'm adding shadows and highlights. It's one less thing to worry about. It's one less thing that I have to consider. And so that can help, because they can creep up on you in ways that you're not necessarily expecting. And so I have learned to do this first so that I can avoid that from happening. Even though there's a gap here, I'm going to want to make sure it makes sense, because this brown will inevitably be filling that space in between. Although for the most part it's kind of angled down, on this little bit of a dip. Now the bottom lip, typically I'll have one line coming straight down, and then the lines to either side will go in different directions. Right, you can see that. Same thing on this side. One straight down, that's how you avoid line conflicts. And then on either side, to make it easier, you'll loop it. It'll also sort of mimic that contour, which we'll pick up on. A little thing like that. Right, if I take that off, you get the impression it's looped, simply because we have one coming straight down and then we loop to the right and the left. Now, as we come up, we also have where the eye is bulging, right? So as we come up here, this eye is bulging, so we would change the direction of our, that's brown. I forgot I did that. Change the direction of our strokes, because it's coming out and then it's bulging up because our eyes are, you know, a circular recess in our heads. And same is true with cows. They have that little bit of a bulge, and then it would straighten back out. And my strokes are starting to get a little longer as we're coming up into these sections. As it gets longer, it's okay for the fur to be a little bit more loose. Direction doesn't have to be as static as we have been making it. And of course we have the ear, where typically on an ear the hair gets shorter again. Now with cows, they have some long bits kind of on the ear, but for the most part the hair right along the edge is shorter. And then some long fluffiness. Same thing on this side. Some hair coming off the head, and then some short hair for the ear. Right, this is how it's looking so far. Kind of getting the impression for it. Look better once we get, you know, the fur on the head fully situated. All right. Just want to make sure it all lines up and makes sense. And I'm going to be turning that right as we come down this side, turning this angle of that fur coming off. Oh, that's brown. All right, now the ears also still have some white. I'm actually going to have a little bit of coming off, because there's some white underneath here. Some white behind the ear. Right, it has a little bit of fluff coming down. Not always, but I think it would work here in this case. Yeah. And then we'll get to the brown. Really, it's kind of like a tan color. Right, so following that same thing, right? We have this hair, so we're just putting these lines in between, because we've already kind of sorted out that direction. So the brown is almost a little easier because we're just going in between the lines we've already kind of created or started to create with a white. So just continuing that up. Still around the eye, right? We'll come straight in at its corner here and then angle this up as we get above it. Now around eyes you have to be careful. So being careful as we come up. And then sort of loop that over. We have the kind of this bridge as I have the brown coming over. Right, and then we angle down below, again still being careful. Right, this back side, you still want all of this to be nice and lined up and making sense. And then just bridge the brown to the white on the other side, and or to the edge of the drawing. Following those lines out. Should start really looking like a cow now. Thought about doing black, but I'm not a big fan of doing black when I can avoid it, because I draw on black. So to do black I have to do gray, and that's its own series of problems. Alright, so if I take that off, yeah, it's here. Same thing on this side. We have these lines coming up, these coming down. We want to come straight in at that edge, and then we'll follow this contour up and over. Right. And then heading down on this side, all the way to that edge. It's okay that the colors don't line up perfectly. You'll want some overlap, so if anything, they have some flexibility for the white and this tan to kind of intermingle. Alright, I have a little spot here on the head, and then the nose. So we have kind of the noses of the cows. They're interesting. They can be a variety of colors. Sometimes they're the color of the fur around it, which is what we're going to do. We're just going to keep it that brown. Sometimes they're pink. Sometimes they're spotted. Now we have the chin white, where that fur underneath is white. And the nose, we'll do that brown. Could do it white, could do it pink, and we'll do it brown. I'll have this coming down, nice long strokes, because this doesn't matter. Kind of the same thing we did with the chin. We have one section coming straight down, and then we're looping it on either side until we get to the nostril. I might decide to add some white in here, might not. It partly depends on if I remember and to analyze it if I think it's worth the effort. It's just easier to stick, it'll be easier to stick to the brown, but that might add like another nice detail. Right, you have it coming down to the nostril. And then, you know, of course the ears. We're going to have some brown. We treat the ears the same way we do with the others. Middle section coming in, and then fanning out on either side. And then we'll fill in the white, probably a little later. So this is big fluffy white here in the middle. Same thing over here. Middle section, that sort of angles off either direction. Some interior of the ear that we're picking up on, which is that short hair. Okay. Yeah, now we really get the sense that this is a cow. We'll fill in the rest of the ear later. Alright, so we're going to have the light source coming from above and to the right. As always, that means it's above and in front of, not behind or next to. In front of is the best way to sort of highlight your subject, whether that's in front to the right or the left. Typically don't do straight on. I typically will choose a side because that can add, you have a chance to sort of add more varied shadows and highlights. And it is the shadows and highlights that, it's where our magic kind of comes into play. So we're actually going to start this little fluff here in the middle and put that full pin pressure in. This is solidly in highlight. And we're just going to follow the lines we already did. Right? Coming down and off. So we don't have to think about it, we've already done it. We've already done that work. What we do have to think about is highlights and shadows. So all edges will be in shadow. I'm going to go ahead and do some shadowing real fast. Even on the side of the light source, you're going to have some shadowing. Won't be nearly as pronounced as it is on the side away from the light source. But to add shadows in, right, I'm using the same brush. The only thing I'm changing is I'm backing off my pin pressure. You can see how much of a difference that makes. When I'm holding back my pin pressure, it's much, much lighter. So just getting these edges in. And then of course as it comes underneath, right, that'll be in shadow. Now, if I add too many lines, I can create a highlight as well. So it doesn't necessarily need full pin pressure to create a highlight. So as I'm shadowing, I need to be mindful about how many lines I'm adding, because I can accidentally create a highlight just with that. And then of course on the chin, I'm going to do the whole chin in shadow. I find that easier, but we will be adding highlight to that. It's just not a lot of space to work with, typically on a chin. That's why I do it that way. Right, sort of lightly. Fill this all the way in. I don't have to think about that direction. It's really nice. Helpful. Now their chins are kind of tucked under a big nose, so this may actually have more shadow than typical chin, but still likely going to have some highlight. We'll cross that when it gets to it. It's a little easier to control it when you have shadow in place for the reason I mentioned before, right? Like I can add more lines and create a highlight, and that gives me a little bit more control. And then this whole backside here, this little cheek, I guess, it's all shadow because that's on the opposite side of the light source. You also have the nose blocking it. And then at some point there's a transition from highlight to shadow on this backside. But all of this definitively shadow. Right, it's okay to not have a straight edge, especially on cows. They wouldn't. Their spots are kind of not straight. Alright, bringing that down. We'll connect it to the other and then we'll start working our way up. On the back side like this, I'll give myself a little bit of a runway so that I have more room to add in the shadow. So usually I make it a little deeper than it has to be. I'm going to push it into where there would be highlight, and that'll make it easier to transition into shadow. But you can see I added a few too many lines here and I almost brightened up that section. That's where you have to be careful. Yeah, so some of this, I think at this point we would be definitively trespassing into the highlighted section. But this will give me enough room to build that in slowly. Alright. Now for this, we'll typically have more highlight than elsewhere. It's almost like if you think of a ball, right? If you're holding a ball and there's light hitting it, you would have, more highlight on the top of the ball where that light's coming in, right? You have that light sort of coming in, that angle. And a forehead typically on animals doesn't have anything really blocking it unless you have, antlers or something else coming in. Horns or antlers, or sometimes on lizards they're interesting shapes, but so usually the forehead has that highlight will push over a little bit further. Has more highlighting in general. But, right, all edges are in shadow, so we're bringing this around. Now I have some pieces of hair kind of coming up a little wildly. That's what this is, so it's not necessarily the edge of the head, so I don't want a shadow to that. That's just some stray long hairs coming up. And then, you know, same on this side. Bringing that shadow in. Still have some stray long hairs coming up. That's what some of that is. And then on the ear, back side. Same is true over here, that ear. And then you have another kind of edge. And kind of an edge where that eye is also coming down. And over here. An edge where the eye is coming down. And then where the ear has kind of that section pushing. I'm going to add a little bit more shadowing right through here. Just because you have kind of a bump in the head. And you can kind of see it in the way it's drawn, and I want to make sure, you know, that's indicated. Just that little bit. Now, I'm going to put full pin pressure, fill in the rest of the face, and I will be right back. Alright, so we're left with kind of a harsh transition all the way around, which I did that kind of on purpose so that we could blend it in. So to blend in some highlight into shadow, what we're going to do is go up to the edge of the shadow and we're going to add more lines. I mentioned earlier, you know, if you add more lines, you brighten it up. So it's not just about pin pressure, and anywhere where the lines are already there, we're just going to brighten up just that little bit. And see, I'm not adding more pin pressure here, although I do need to bring this over. I left kind of a gap to give myself a little runway on all of these. It can help, you know, when you're trying to blend it and make it look smooth, because you don't want an obvious transition from highlight to shadow. Right, so it's not a lot of pin pressure, it's just more lines so that I can control exactly what's transitioning and when that transition is happening. A little easier than if I were doing full pin pressure. It's a lot easier to add a highlight than it is to take it away in this style, because I don't erase. Right, and you can see now on the right side it's already looking a lot better. Not 100% there yet, but a lot better. And then we'll just sort of smooth out the rough edges anywhere they come in. So we'll do down here. Same thing. Not more pin pressure, just more lines. And sort of fade it out. And of course, the more lines we add, the brighter it gets, and you want to add more where the highlight's first transitioning to shadow. Right, so if you can get this transition seamless right through here, then the rest of it's just a matter of fading it out. And whatever we do here in the white, we'll need to mimic once we get to the brown. Or tan, or, you know, whatever you want to call it. Whatever that color is. And then we'll do it for the rest. Now, I was careful here about backing off just a little bit away from the brown with the highlight. Partly because you don't want a color change or a highlight and shadow change in a color change. It looks like the color is different. So I often try to avoid that and instead opt to have a color change, a highlight or shadow change to happen in one color instead of spread over two. I mean, you can start fading it in one, that's fine. But if it goes like this is highlight and this is shadow, that won't look as good. It'll just look like it's a different color instead of a shadow kicking in. I'm going to concentrate brightening it up right where the connection point happens, and then the rest is just that fading out. But that is also why I gave myself a little bit of a deeper room here to play with what was going on. And you can see how that's doing as we move into it. Now along the ear, which I'll finish out the blending this together, and I'll talk about, there'll be some highlighting here. And then of course I still have to fill in the rest of that ear. And then we'll add a little bit of highlight to the, whatever this is, the chin. We'll add a little bit of highlight to the chin. The thing on your face. I also added a little bit of a shadow here in this bulge in the eye. Because, right, you know, you have a bulge happening, light source coming from above and to the right, there would potentially be some shadowing where that bulge is turned away from the light source. Doesn't have to be anything big. In fact, it doesn't fully have to be there. We might not notice it's not, you know, that it is or is not, but okay. Add a little bit onto the chin. Again, I've already laid the groundwork here, so I don't need to put full pen pressure. I'm just adding more lines. It's just like we did with the shadows, bridging the highlights to the shadows. Anywhere where I've already added lines and basically have added a shadow, I don't really need to put more pen pressure. Adding more lines will relatively quickly brighten it up. Especially on a place like a chin where you are working with a lot less room. Sometimes I do it this way. And then you'd add the highlight all the way, you know, past this middle point, and then start fading it off as we come down this side. But just like the other, right, we need that little bit of a runway to really fade it. Bring it over a little bit more. Now we're going to get the brown on the face. Let's do this little bit of white actually on the back of the ear here. So this would be highlight. But because it's such a narrow spot, I'm still not putting full pin pressure. I'm just adding a lot of extra lines. Putting a little bit more pin pressure, just not as much as I could, because I don't want to do too much. Okay, and there's a little bit of highlight right through here. Now we'll get the brown tan color in. So right by the nose, this is pretty straightforward. This whole thing will be in highlight. And as I mentioned before, right, it doesn't really matter that the colors are overlapping with each other. That'll make it look more natural since the colors, you know, they're sort of blending. So if we were looking at shadow real fast, I'm going to go ahead and shadow these in the edges, right? We have all of the shadow on this guy to consider. We push this up pretty high, so we're going to push the shadow on this one the same amount. So that we can have the same kind of working space we dealt with when we were dealing with the white. We're going to want that shadow transition to highlight in roughly the same spot, so it's important we get that kind of correct before we start adding highlights. Really holding back the pin pressure, careful not to add too many lines, it's easy to do and get it almost a little carried away. Of course you have, you know, behind the eye, all of this obviously shadow. Some of this is not going to be though. Under the eye, typically in highlight, even on an animal whose eyes are turned sideways like this, you typically would not have a highlight under the eye. It's turned away from the light source. However, I find sometimes giving it a little burst under the eye can help. You know, as illusionists, sometimes we have to recognize that in translating an object from from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions, we need to make some changes that might help it in the long run, and that can be one of those cases. Right, it might be a mix of shadow and highlight through there. Against the eye, we're going to have some shadowing because it's dipped in. Opposite is true, right, where I just mentioned over here, where under the eye it's going to be some highlight, but I'm going to go ahead and do that in shadow real fast because it's not going to be much when we do add it. This is going to be highlight though, so we have a chunk that'll bleed down into highlight, right, because the face is rounding over. So while we have a good bit of distance to make sure that the face kind of rounds over, you know, right by the eye, typically above the eye to the edge of the eye would all be highlight, and then as you transition down, transitioning the rest of that into shadow. It's usually how I'll do it. I do find it kind of translates well that way. I may make some adjustments to this shadow because it's such a big one and I need to make sure it kind of makes sense. So pushing it up too much won't really hurt the composition. Again, because I can add, I can add highlight. But taking away highlight is a little harder. So having too much shadow is to work with isn't necessarily a bad thing. I need to make sure I have enough so I can transition everything seamlessly. Right, and then, on this side, just like before, all edges are in shadow, so we have all of this, just like we did down here. Some of this also above, because we'll have that cut point happening through here. So all of this shadow, but not the whole thing, so it won't be much. Just this sort of little strip. And making sure the edge of the face is straight. Shadow right by the eye. Same reason. And then we won't do the nose yet, we'll do that later. So then the last spot we're going to add it right now is just here against the head. Being mindful of the fact I have some of his hair for pushing up, right, like these are stray hairs kind of coming up. And it's okay if a few lines go astray for the same reason I have some stray hair here. And then just like we had here, right, maybe a little bit of shadowing against this section of the eye as that turns inward, and there would be shadowing underneath just like on the other side where as the eye turns down it would potentially be catching some shadow. Some of this is highlight, I just need to make sure I know where the edge of the eye is. It was a little jagged. Okay. Now, I'm going to do the rest of the tan on the face and highlight, and I will be right back. Alright, I've blended some of it already. Just found that a little easier to do. I'm going to brighten up just one little section before I blend in this section here, and I'm probably going to lighten up the shadow right by the eye over here. Right, so all of this is sort of blended, so I'm going to blend this just like we did before. It's just a matter of adding more lines to create the highlight, to bridge the highlight to the shadow, and just sort of push that in a bit to give it some breathing room. And then, you know, that little bit of burst under the eye here doesn't have to be anything big. Just gonna do just enough that it's noticeable, and then fade it out. That's just enough to give it a little bit of different center. And now I'm gonna brighten up just this little section in here. Still gonna leave it a little shadowed, but I don't think it needs all that. I'm gonna go in with the white and do the same thing to the light and brighten this up. All right. I'm gonna brighten up this up here too. I can kind of see it when I pull away. It's a little too gapped. And sometimes, because of the nature of it, what I'll notice is I accidentally brighten up an area a little too much, so I need to brighten up areas around it so that it doesn't look like there's an unintentional highlight somewhere. Doesn't take much, just a few general lines to brighten things up. Now, we're going to go ahead and do the nose, and then we'll get to the ears, and then it'll be the eyes, and that'll be it. Just debating on if I want to bridge this any closer, but for now I think it's fine. Alright, so the nose we're doing in that same tan. And I'm going to save it periodically. Sometimes Photoshop crashes, and that's very sad, so always good to save. Okay, so I feel like there's definitely a weird edge here. So I'm just going to pop back down to the white and fill in what I think is a gap. It looks like a gap. Alright, before going back up here. Okay. Right, underneath shadow, there's a little bit of an edge here where the nose pushes forward from the face, so I'm going to have that in shadow. Underneath, definitely shadow, because it kind of pushes down. And then, of course, as we come to the other side, it would all be shadow, but, well, it'll work its way over to shadow. And going all the way up. The highlight will work itself over above the nostril, both sides, you would have some shadowing. Right, so you have shadowing as it comes down. Same thing on this side, shadowing as it comes down. And then you have kind of a bulge as it comes out, right? You have this bulge happening. One side be primarily shadow, which is over here. So I'm just going to get this all the way in. And the other side is going to have a lot of highlight to it. And I'm just debating on what order to do what in. So I might add just an edge to get a feel for exactly how I'm lining this up. So, the rest of this should be highlight. Once we transition to this midpoint, there'll be some tapering off, so this is all that runway. I'm going to do the right half in highlight, and I'll be right back. Alright, Now we're going to start that transition over to shadow. Gonna just taper in this bottom here real fast. And then, you know, he has such a big nose. Okay. So, still full pin pressure as we kind of work our way over. So this is kind of like the chin where we're sort of playing this by ear. As I come down to the bottom, I am lessening my pin pressure to connect them in. It makes it a little easier to connect highlight to shadow. When I'm demonstrating, I don't always do that because I want to be able to show how to do it, but show how to bridge them when they're already harsh. But I'll come to the edge and lessen this off, and that'll allow me to blend it in a lot easier. That's what I'm doing here. And as we work over, I'm going to start tapering it off maybe through here. We can kind of play that by ear as we go. Right, we're now past that midpoint, so now we should be lessening this out. So just tapering it off slowly. Has a nice long runway, so there's plenty of room to do this. Alright, so we end up with sort of a tapered look, not quite as exactly where I want it, so I'm going to bring it over just a little bit more. Just involves brightening up just a bit as we bring this over. Partly because, right, we don't go into shadow on top till a little later. Not to say we have to match perfectly, the nose is pushed forward and shaped a little different, but there's some merit there. Making sure it all makes sense. And what we've done on top, we're going to do down here as well. So we have this little bulge happening. So this would be catching some light. But not as much, obviously, as the other side. Just adding more lines to brighten it up a little bit, but not completely brightening it up all the way. Now I might change the shape of this nostril a little bit. I have not made them even, so I'm just going to bring this down. Doesn't have to be much. Just a little, just to change that shape. And subsequently we'll push this down some as well. And then we're going to change this shape. And brighten that up because it's a bulge on the highlighted side. Okay. Yeah. Looking nice and cow-like here. All right. Now for the ears. I'm going to finish out some of the white. So we have some of the big fluffy hair coming up that you'll see a lot of times. The rest is just the small kind of white hair that's in there inside the ear. So the bigger, longer fluffs in the ear, right? They're going to be nice, long sort of strokes where you have that white hair kind of kicking in and kicking up. All right. Now, going to lightly shadow in the inside of the ear. And we're going to do this before we do the long fluffs, because the fluffs will have some highlighting on them. I mean, this will too, but the fluffs kind of take priority as far as how that highlight's going to go. So I'm going to go ahead and lightly do all of the in-betweens, like all of this little hair on both sides in shadow, just following the lines we just did. And I will be right back. All right. Now, their ears would be catching some light, right? You have the light source coming from above and to the right. The ears kind of swoop in and then back out, right? So there's this little bit of highlighting that'll be here, and then some highlighting down here, and then the white fluffs are going to have some highlighting. So I'm going to go ahead and do the highlighting for the brown. So we're going to have some highlighting up here. Going to go quickly into shadow because the ear is going to be dipping in. I'm going to have some highlighting on the tip. Not much because all edges are in shadow. And you're going to have this down here, which would be turned kind of up, catching the light. Still all edges are in shadow though. Right, so you have this little bit kind of coming up. As we get towards the middle, you would have that fading out. Right, so we'd have that catching a bit of light. And we'll do kind of the same thing on this side. You're going to have a little bit of highlighting here. Tip not in shadow because now this is turned away, but you would still have this side here picking up highlight. Same thing where it's almost till you get to that middle and then you start tapering it off. Same thing with this little bit over here. Right, this would still be, I'd be catching a bit. And then we're going to do the same thing with the white. Right, where we have this bit of highlighting here. But we're going to have some shadowing because of the fluffs. And once again, the fluffs on this side would also be casting a little bit of a shadow, so being mindful of how close we're getting to that. And when I pull back, you'll kind of see what this little bit of highlighting does to the ear. It should really kind of illuminate it nicely. Right, when we pull back, you get the impression that the ears kind of dip in with the shadow and then come back out. Okay, so now we're going to do the fluffs. We're going to do the fluffs all in shadow as well, but they're obviously long, sort of fluffy hair. I'm going to fill in all of those gaps. So that's that light pin pressure. And it's okay for your strokes to kind of be going every which way because of the nature of the way these hair fluffs are, right? They're big, long, sort of scrambly pieces of hair. I don't know if scrambly is the right word, but man, it sounds cool, doesn't it? Maybe it's just me. Right, so just this light pin pressure, and then in the next step I'll be adding highlights to it. These would really be highlighted. We may add more highlighting to the inside of the ear. We'll see how that goes. Because after we do this, we'll do the eyes. Still debating on if I should give them eyelashes or not. you know, you see them, cows do have them, or they can have them. Right, you know, there's long squiggly hair. I'm going to do the same to the other side before I start adding highlights. And then we'll need to be mindful. See this, I have like a little section that comes up here too of the hair. Alright, and then down here, kind of the long hair. Going every which way. Kind of see it when you pull back, right? You could see it on the other one exactly where the fluffs are, because the hair is different, different direction, and it's a little bit more wild. It's not as uniform. All helps lend itself to that sensation. All right, now, so these fluffs, light source above and to the right, so they'd be more, you know, towards this side, going into shadow on the back side where it's going inside the ear. Right, so this is, I am putting a little bit extra pin pressure because I'm making these sort of nice long strokes. But I'm not putting full pin pressure. I don't need to because I've already, you know, added highlights, or sorry, I've already shadowed it, so it's a little easier. It's kind of already half highlighted in. Right, so we're just going to fill all that in with its nice big fluffy ears. See, it can kind of go in different directions. You can have little pieces of hair kind of going off. That'll make it look a little bit more realistic. And that it's a little messier because it's longer. Making sure it fades nicely into the ear back here. Alright, so there's one. I'll do the same thing over here, except over here you're going to have the highlight weighted more on the back side and not on the tips. Still needing to go into the ear though, so be a gap. It's kind of in the middle. It gets its burst of highlight. And the tip's still going into shadow. Right, same thing though. We can still kind of mess it up. I'm just going to do it with light pin pressure. Not as heavy as I did on the other side. Much lighter. You have kind of hair going in different ways. Alrighty. Although I am going to brighten up this middle section. Try to make it look a little bit more like the other side, as bright and meaningful. Meaningful? I don't know that that's the right word. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Alright, I'm gonna do a little bit of eyebrows here. Or eyelashes, eyebrows. Ooh, close. I'm gonna do the same thing on this side. A little bit of eyelashes. I'll add a little bit of highlights to them. Now, one side is definitely more beefy than the other. And then, okay, I think that is probably more in line with the other side. Now the eyes. I haven't selected a color yet for this. Cows can have a variety of eye colors. We're going to go with brown. That's pretty common in animals. Alright, so we're going to do this brown. I'm actually going to pop back on the sketch layer so that I can mark the brown in case I need to reference it. Okay. So we're going to have the pupil. Looking at us. Pupil. looking at us. And then we're gonna fill in the rest of that. Same thing over here. Following the layer, right, the eye down. See how I'm sloping that down? Same thing on this side. It would be going down because it's a circle, right? So following that down. Making sure that comes all the way over though. And then just filling that in. I made the eyes a little ovular. Probably. When I use the, elliptical marquee tool to fix those edges like I always do. When I do that, I'll make them more circular. I don't know why I was doing that. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Right, so the eyelid is casting a shadow here, but I want it to come up enough that enough of it's indicated so that our brains fill in the gaps. It's probably enough at this point, but the other side I feel like it's a little less. Right, so just bring in the brown around. I think they're both roughly the same height. I think these eyelashes come down a little further. That's probably why. I can do the same over here if I need to. Okay. So we're going to take the elliptical marquee tool. Make a nice big circle. Gonna have a little bit of an ovular shape because it would be turned looking at us. Right, so if I take that away, yeah. Now I will do this to help clean the edges. I used to not do this, but sometimes, you want to make sure your edges are nice and straight. So to do that, I just select inverse, and then I'm going to select it back, and I'm going to take the selection and move it to the other side, and then get it right. Right over here, and now I'm going to erase that and then inverse it. Take the drawing tool again and fill in the gaps. And then deselect. Okay, now, so light source coming from above and to the right, so that means there's going to be a burst of light against the pupil, the opposite side of the light source. And then the side of the light source, you're going to have a nice highlight going all the way underneath the pupil, fading out on the edges, right? So it comes to this edge, it would fade out. And as it comes to the top, it would also fade out on the inner side of the pupil here. But all the way under to the edge, and on this edge, also to the edge, you're going to have highlight. And then the edge in shadow. Before going into shadow on this back side. And then just sort of, blend it all in. Oh, that was a little much. So that's one side. Now we're going to do the other. Same thing against pupil. You're going to have that burst of highlight. And then light on this side going all the way underneath. Going into shadow on the edge. And going to shadow above, so there'll be more shadowing as it comes down, because this comes down at a more extreme angle, so they would have more shadowing there. And then just sort of, fading it off. And shadowing it on this backside. Alright, now, I'm gonna come down here real fast to this white and extend its little hair down just a smidge. I'm gonna fill in the gap for us like it did on the other side. Okay, now, above we're gonna have the light flare. So the light flare is done in white. Always do it on the side where there's more shadow so I can make sure I get a good spot first. Make a little bit of a circle. Make sure it's in the highlight, not in the shadowed section. And I'm going to fill with the foreground color. And then we're going to drag it to the other side. And do the same thing. Make it as close in relation to this side as we did on this one, right? We want them both to match, but we want it above and to the right. I think that's roughly right. Fill with the foreground color. Yeah. And the last thing we're going to do is come in here with the lasso tool and mimic some hair, right? Some fur pushing in, right? So it's got some fur coming in. I don't know, that's the right angle. As if, we have some fur blocking it. Yeah. There we go. Alright, so that is how you draw a cow. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.